Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the Constitution, the law, and the events of today to you each month. Hi, I'm James Barrett, and tonight with Mark Malachowski, we're going to be going forward with several issues of key importance in today's news. Mark, what's our first subject?
Well, the first one is a $12 million dogfight that was centered around Leona Helmsley.
Wait a minute, are you talking about the dogfight like Snoopy and the Red Baron, or are we talking about something completely different?
Worse than a Snoopy and the Red Baron. This is a legal dogfight over $12 million because Leona Helmsley, famous for taunting the IRS, because she said only poor people have to pay taxes.
I thought she was an extremely successful real estate developer and broker.
She was a mogul in New York.
And then what happened?
Well, actually, she did pretty well, but when she passed away in 2007, she left $12 million to her dog, Trouble.
Wait a minute. Was that all of her money to her dog? Or
No.
This is
She had
a small portion of her money, wasn't it?
She left most of her money to a foundation for charities, but she gave $12 million to the dog, Trouble, who was a Maltese, a small dog. You know, it's in New York.
Well, wait a minute. Why would she leave $12 million to a dog? How could the dog ever eat $12 million worth of dog food?
Well, this dog was pretty well maintained, and so the grandchildren were upset because they were left out of the will.
Wait a minute. Usually in a will, if there's somebody left out of a will, there's a reason to be left out of the will. And grandchildren, often from the rich and famous, are not necessarily the best candidates for inheriting a large amount of money to begin with.
But anyway, they did a will contest, and they said they're not happy about this, so they took this to court, and they fought Trouble.
Okay, well, I got a question. Was there a no contest clause in that will?
I think there probably was.
Then how did they overcome that?
But the thing is, what the judge found in this case, well, first of all, the dog, Trouble, had to be flown by a Learjet to a secret location because there was allegedly death threats against Trouble.
Wait a minute. Trouble, the dog, the Maltese,
Trouble the dog,
had to have an executor to take care of the Maltese. It had to have an adult human of some sort that watched over the dog. So do we know who that was?
I don't know who that was, but you're exactly right. You can't leave money directly to an animal. You have
contractually not valid.
Yeah, you have to have, you can leave it for the upkeep
in
of the
trust
animal.
of the animal.
Right. And so, but at any rate, so apparently there was death threats against the dog, so it had to be whisked away in a Learjet to Florida in hidden location so it didn't get bumped off.
Wait a minute. Were the death threats from the grandchildren that are contesting the will, leaving $12 million to the dog?
We don't know.
But mysteriously, there's death threats.
But we don't know about, well, there was allegedly death threats.
But wait a minute, my question is, if the dog died, where would the money go anyway if there's still money left over?
Okay, well, that's something we'll get to later in IRAs and stuff like that. But the remainder would go back to the foundation, to this charity.
So in fact, there's already a mechanism if the dog died and say there's $11,500,000 left, that money would be automatically back to the foundation she left the majority of her estate to anyway. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if the grandchildren had bumped off the dog, they might have been out of the money anyway.
Well, this is the part I have a little problem with, because if there's already a mechanism for the dog's effectively the remainder from the estate that was left to the dog, that already had a place to go, that means there was an accurate and a well-developed will or trust, however that was done. And because of that, that meant the money was already allocated anyway. So the grandchildren trying to step into an allocation that already has been established, it means they're contesting every aspect of the will and the trust.
Yeah, and that's true, but in this case, they were successful.
They were successful.
Yeah, there was two grandchildren. They each got $5 million, and Trouble got shorted with only $2 million.
Well, wait a minute. But the main expenses of Trouble must have been the trustee that was handling Trouble's estate.
Well, what the judge ruled is $2 million was probably enough money to keep Trouble in the what do they say, in the style he had become accustomed to living.
The style he had become accustomed to, like a wife. That decides I'm never going to work because my husband, the actor, makes $100 million a year.
So for the expected lifespan, the judge said $2 million would probably cover dog food and grooming for the dog.
But would it cover the fleas?
Yeah, so we don't know about that. But anyway, so they did get awarded $5 million each, and but it does bring up a couple of interesting things. Oftentimes, parents do generation skipping, where they leave things to grandchildren. In this case, she left things to the foundation. She didn't want to leave anything to the grandchildren. But I still think it's kind of a tricky thing sometimes, leaving money to charity in estate planning.
Well, I have a question. Obviously there were children of Miss Helmsley. Do we have any knowledge whether or not the children received any of the estate?
I don't have that in front of me. The most, how do we say, famous part of this case was the dispute between Trouble and the grandkids.
Yeah, I
so
think
the
rest was kind of suppressed, so we don't know what else.
The rest was probably, went by normal routes, but this was a huge fight, and but it's interesting when you start looking at these kind of trusts and these kind of wills. Oftentimes people want to skip a generation, and quite often they can put together a trust or something, like the Rockefellers had trusts that went on for generations. And
so the Kennedys, of course.
Yeah, and so what they would do is that they would keep the principal alive, and generations would live off the dividends or the profits off that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I have a question. If that was in 2007, you said that the dog inherited the money. Is the dog still alive?
No, the dog passed away in 4 years in 2011. Unfortunately, the dog passed.
But wait a minute, was the legal fight still ongoing when the dog passed?
No, I think the legal fight was done before that.
Oh, the legal fight was over.
Yeah.
So the dog never felt the poverty of what could have happened.
Well, yeah, the dog was not left destitute on the street.
That's terrible.
So it lucked out that way. So it lived.
It didn't have to run from dog catchers.
Yeah, so it lived.
Didn't have to run from angry gangs.
It lived in the 4 years in the style it was accustomed to living in.
And that would that be a silk pillow with the food fed by a trustee?
It was being flown around in a Learjet. So,
well, I got to tell you,
they wasn't no first.
What type of Learjet? Was it a good one or a cheap one?
No first class, seating for Trouble.
For no trouble.
Trouble went. But yeah, also Lorena, she was also not only for baiting the IRS, because when she said that only poor people pay taxes, she was audited, and that had a huge effect on her business. But she got a little brassy, I guess. Well, she's in New York,
Well, the whole question is I understand she earned most of her wealth by being married to Mr. Helmsley, who was actually the real estate mogul who put it all together.
But she did some deals on her own.
She was like the younger bride to the old man.
But I think she participated in the business, and she did real estate as well.
Well, she was a social icon,
right,
and a philanthropist,
right.
And so she did animals was basically her main forte for philanthropy. So I think that charities like that.
She was also kind of famous for the soup incident.
The soup incident?
Yeah, because she was in a really fancy restaurant, and she called the waiter over, and she said, "Waiter, taste this soup." And the waiter goes, "Well, is it too hot?" And she goes, "Waiter, just taste the soup." He goes, "Is it too cold?" She says, "Waiter, just taste the soup." And then, the waiter goes, "Well, is it too salty?" She says, "Just taste the soup." So he says, "Okay." He goes, "Where's the spoon?" She goes, "Aha!" So yeah, she was a famous in the real estate business, and she's famous for dog trouble.
But she was a friend of Donald Trump's too, wasn't she?
I think she ran in those same circles.
And ex-mayor Bloomberg.
And I thought they might have been kind of competitors.
Yeah, they were competitors. They were all kind of in the real estate empire trying to get the...
Well, the Helmsley building, if you go to New York, it's a very famous building, and, they put their names on it. And
yeah, but who inherited all that?
I think a lot of it went to charity. I think quite a bit went to a foundation.
Well, no wonder the grandkids were going crazy. Was that the $5 million chump change they got out of their grandmother is all they got?
Yeah, and then a lot of times, I think that people don't understand that charities and foundations sometimes have very high convenience fees.
Oh, and expenses, overhead.
Yeah, the overhead. So, I mean, a lot of times I advise clients, well, even if you have some second thoughts about it, you might put it into some kind of trust and do some kind of business that your kids couldn't really mess up. Yeah. Like a parking lot or a laundromat or a dry cleaner.
Continues to generate
income. You can hire a manager, and the income just comes in, something very low key.
Right.
And because a lot of times people, invest in these or give charitable donations to these foundations. It turns out the foundations have very high overhead.
Well, I don't want to get into tonight, but I know we're going to cover the Wounded Warrior issue with the two head people of Wounded Warrior, who, funny enough, looted large amounts of money through high salaries, entertainment, and travel, and all of that.
But I mean, a lot of times, these foundations are taking, they're supposed to only take about 15%, 5 or 15%.
Well, that's the good.
But sometimes they're taking up to 60, 70, 80, 90%. So,
Okay.
you know, on that note, you know, I think people have to do some research before you look at this charity. If you're gonna
Okay,
leave a
well,
charity.
before we do that, why don't we move on to our next subject? What's our next subject, Mark?
Well, the next subject is an EB5, which is a type of immigration visa.
Okay, we're talking about the immigration visa. If you bring in $500,000 or $1 million and you invest it in an area that they call a working project area and you employ 10 people, is that the one we're talking about?
Exactly. What happens if you bring in $1 million from another country and you employ 10 people for a couple of years, and that you can put your business in any location, or if it's a neighborhood that's, you know, a little bit more marginal, then that's
Right.
$500,000. But the main thing is you're supposed to employ 10 Americans for a couple of years, and you know, and there's certain ways where you can get into funds and put your money in with other people and work out some of these things too.
Let's talk a little bit about this, because I know in my office we've actually tinkered with this a little bit.
Right.
I found it to be another one of those specialties you have to really have a lot of knowledge on.
Well, they're complex.
They're very complex.
Each one's complex.
And what happens is they have these zones,
Right.
the work zones. And what happens is the ultimate goal is for somebody to bring in $1 million and to establish a business in one of these work zones, employ 10 people. But in reality, the person that's bringing the money in gets automatic pass to citizenship, and they immediately get a green card and they get all that. But the problem is,
I think you have to do that, the 2-year.
no, you have to have the timeline,
Yeah,
but it's an automatic process.
Well, you're online.
There
You're
is no wait 20 years to get.
No, but I'm just saying. But I still think they look at you in that 2-year.
Well, you have to be part of the company you're financing.
Well, not only that. Okay, a lot of what the IRS looks like at, and what a lot of what immigration looks like at, is whether you just borrow the money, put it in a bank account, and then pay it back next week.
No. You have to.
So they want to make sure the money goes through.
First of all, they do tracing.
Right.
You know the word tracing. And
Right.
in divorce cases, it's the biggest word that everyone always gets upset about is where the money came from. Let's
Skip
trace
tracing.
it.
Yeah.
So now what we have is we have a lot of Chinese investors. They have to prove that the money came from a legitimate source and not somebody just handing them the money to go do it. They have to have.
They're supposed to have paid taxes.
Yeah, they're
taxes
supposed
on
to,
it in
yes,
their country.
they have to have a history on the
And
money.
that's what's happening. See, in China, there's kind of been an overturn of one. There's basically a couple hundred families that run China, and then once in a while, those 200 families get kicked out, another 200 come into power.
Well, that's the change of the premiers or whatever.
Yeah. So and then you know, a lot of people who have properties in multiple houses, they can't really explain how they got all that stuff, so they want to move before.
Well, what happens if you don't get your money out? You could lose everything.
Well, you could lose.
And your life.
You could lose your life.
And by the way, then they send the bill for the bullet to your next of kin.
And so so many Chinese have come this year. There's 10,000 quota spots for this, and that's already been, by May 1st, those will be run out. There's 13,000 pending applications, and now a lot of those folks used to go through Canada, but Canada shut this down entirely.
Yeah, well, Canada had the program. If you brought, say, $200,000, this is the old days. You bring in 200 grand into Canada.
Then they just come over.
Then they automatically become a Canadian citizen.
And then they come right over.
And then they come across the border because Canada and U.S. is like freedom.
There's no border. So
there
anyway,
is no border.
So they're saying they can't take any more Chinese. But what's interesting about this, when you really start looking at the thing, there's 10,000 millionaires left France in 2015. Okay, that's 3% of their.
That's a lot of millionaires out of France.
Okay, that's 3% of their millionaires, and those were mostly millionaires living in Paris. And the reason they were living is because what they call the Muslim question.
Well, the Muslim question.
The Muslim question.
Wait a minute. Are we talking about those poor, oppressed people that are constantly being protected because they're so innocent? Is that what we're talking about?
Anyway, so there's 10,000 millionaires left France last year.
And why did they leave France?
Basically, it's the Muslim question.
Oh, the Muslim question.
And then, and so they brought billions of dollars to the U.S.
Oh, magically.
Now there was also some others, and they were starting to look into this statistically. And there was another thing that the French were going to raise the tax to 70%, and Georges Depardieu went to Belgium and then Russia.
Yeah, you mean the
because
famous actor.
yeah,
Who
and
became a Russian citizen when they said they're going to raise the tax.
And so, well, he went to Belgium and then Russia, but then they kind of gave up on that 70%. So that was one cause they looked at, but they said no, that's not the really cause. The cause is the Muslim question, and people want to get out of the urban areas before they get blown up.
Well, I like to remind everybody that
or shot or whatever. Because
funny enough, Europe has taken in millions of Muslim men between the ages of 18 and 30. And it's funny enough, they don't have jobs and they don't know who they are, but they're allowed.
Well, the point of the matter is that in Paris you can't arm yourself and people are getting shot up. So
well,
they want to
it's
get out of there.
Funny.
So
who gets an AK-47 though?
Well, I don't know for Christmas, but so after France, there's China, Italy, India, Greece, Russia, Spain, and Brazil are the main exporters of millionaires.
Millionaires. Huh?
And so they want to get out of France #1, China #2. And where do they go? They go to Australia. They've taken 8,000 millionaires in 2015. And I'm not sure how, but I think you need 500,000 to get into Australia.
Yeah, you also need anti-snake venom and anti-spider venom to get into Australia. I mean, what's the most dangerous place for reptiles and arachnoids or whatever?
Yeah, well, okay. And the U.S. has taken 7,000 millionaires. Now, what's interesting about this is we have a limit on millionaires. We can only take 10,000 millionaires. But we can take as many poor people as we can.
Well, I actually, to tell you the truth, I'd rather take 100,000 millionaires than 10 poor people from Somalia.
But just kind of interesting.
But I only say that because we need people that generate income.
Okay, and so and another thing I think that kind of caused this flight of millionaires from France to Australia and the U.S. is that the French government decided that terrorists, they were going to strip terrorists of their French citizenship. And then they decided, no, you can keep your citizenship.
Oh, wow.
And people decided, like,
heaven forbid, strip a terrorist of citizenship.
And then there's some tax issues.
But I understand they're moving a lot of terrorists to Los Gatos.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
and I understand
that's a hot spot.
I understand that we have a mutual friend that lives in Los Gatos, and she's excited about that 8,000 Iraqis they're bringing there.
Well, those are Syrians. But anyway.
Syrian, that's right. Okay, and I'm sorry, 8,000 Syrians.
And then also you've got Denmark that has their taxes are 45% of their GDP, and then but France is 48% of their GDP is taxes. And also France had the solidarity tax, which they call the Impôt des Sceaux sur la Fortune, or the ISF, which was
what is that?
Which means if you make over $1.3 million per year, they just soaked you. So there's some of this.
Is that the Bernie Sanders program?
So, yeah, well, yeah, it's about the same thing. But
that's a socialist program.
So there's partly the socialists or the Marxists are kind of scaring off millionaires, and partially it's the Muslims scaring off millionaires, which I would think would be a good argument if we're going to be like for all the millionaire refugees, if we'd stay capitalist and wouldn't have too many Muslim terrorists, we could probably attract a lot of millionaires.
I think our better import is, instead of importing oil, we import millionaires.
Yeah, well, there's no reason.
And how many do you get per barrel?
Yeah, well, these guys are bringing, they brought billions in the U.S. last year, and there's more that want to come. I mean, it's, like I said, we've got 13,000 that are waiting, and, and there was, the 10,000's already used up. But I think that if we made that program a little better, we could bring in more millionaires. So I think we should, as much as possible, encourage millionaires to come here.
Well, it's funny, Mark.
I
think leaving this subject, going on to the next subject, actually goes right into that. We're talking about trust.
Okay.
And when you're a millionaire, you better figure out where to put your money on the day you die. Okay. So where are we putting our money, Mark?
Okay. So our next subject is see-through trust. And
see-through trust.
And that's kind of a...
Is that like the peekaboo lounge?
Yeah, that's an expression that talks about having your trust as a designated beneficiary of your IRA.
Oh, you're talking about your retirement account.
So when you're 70 and a half, you can start drawing from your IRA, right? But if you die quickly thereafter, there might be money left in your IRA.
Which means taxable event.
And you can put that in a trust, okay? And the question is, okay, you could put... right on the beneficiary form, designation form, someone, and so you don't necessarily have to put an IRA into a trust, but there's certain advantages of doing so.
And what are those advantages?
Okay, some of the main ones, you get different protections. For example, you have spendthrift trust. You can set up a spendthrift trust, like say if you have a one of your kids is not that good with money and you're afraid they'll burn through the money right away, you may not want to give them a large chunk of money because they might use it unwisely.
Well, they're going to use it improperly, and the idea of a spendthrift is that you control the distribution of the money from the trust, and you do it in a manner through a trustee that where effectively the beneficiary has to ask and prove what they're doing with the money, or there's a specific amount that's distributed on a regular basis, like monthly, annually, or whatever, or by a certain age.
Right. Or you could do certain milestones, like if you're going to buy a house, if you graduate from college.
If you go to college.
Yeah, if you graduated from college or whatever bump you get, if you're carrying so many units, you get a certain amount per year. So you can put any kind of milestones you want, which is to kind of, influence
can I ask you a question,
your kids to apply themselves.
Well, let me ask you, as the person that's leaving the money, what are we controlled by when we want to make bequests and how that money is to be spent? Are there any limitations for somebody that's leaving money and how they write how the distribution is supposed to go to the beneficiaries?
You can put any conditions on it you want.
Any conditions. So can you reach from the grave and control that money?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can actually reach from the grave and control that money. And the way you would do that is by crafting your trust instrument with enough specificity and complexity that you could, in other words, you might have one child that you think is very responsible, and you say, okay, they're going to go to Stanford, we'll pay for Stanford, and we'll give them all the money at 25. You might have another child, you say, well, I don't really trust them, we'll give them all the money at 40. And so you can modify and specify and customize a trust any way you want to. And so that's the big difference between a trust and a will, because a will is pretty straightforward. It's usually pretty perfunctory. I'm going to divide it up in so many shares or this way, and every person gets this. Where a trust can be a living instrument where you have, and I shouldn't use that term because that'll be confusing.
Yes,
yeah. So
it's also a negative turn in today's context.
I'll retract that, but it is an ongoing enterprise where you can have a trustee, and the trustee has to follow the terms of the trust. Now, and we were talking about that a little bit before, where you could have principal in your trust, and you could have one generation just getting the dividends or the profits, or off that, and then that could go on from generation to generation, or maybe you could have the second generation gets the principal, or however you want to work it.
Can I ask you again about this skipping a generation? How can somebody reach from the grave and skip a generation unless they've spelled out what that generation is going to that they're skipping? Well, they're obviously excluding a generation.
Well, yeah,
and then they have to go beyond that.
And that's something you want to be very careful of, because
it seems like it's almost unconscionable.
Well, because but I mean, you have to be very careful. You got to put in that specific language. Otherwise they're going to claim, well, I'm an admitted spouse, I'm an admitted child. So you want to specifically exclude them.
And that's what I was going to ask you about.
Usually in that case, on the cases I've worked on, they are quite willing to spell out the reasons they want to exclude this person. I'm excluding this person because the wife they married, I think, is a gold digger. I'm excluding this person because they're a drinker. I'm excluding this person because they have a drug habit, and we're willing to give them rehab. We're willing to pay for their upkeep, but we're not going to give them any cash. And so you can in a trust, you can put all that in the spendthrift provision. Now the beneficiary never has to see that wording, necessarily.
When they take it to court, they're going to see that.
No, but I'm saying while the trustor is alive.
Oh, while the
trustor is alive.
Yeah, right. While
they'll see it later when they go and confront the.
The trustee.
I had a case where the trustee. I really felt great empathy for this trustee, because this young woman had inherited a lot of money. She had some abuse problems, and she wanted all the money at once, and she came to me and says, "Why don't I find my trustee?" And I said, "Well, it says here in the trust, the judge's last order is like, we could maybe give you some more money, but you'd have to do some testing, some drug testing." "Oh, I can't do that." So, trustees often have, quite a burden to bear.
Wait a minute. Trustees are running a real intense, because if the trustor has made it clear that the trustee's obligations are and like you said, like I was asking, reaching from the grave to control the money, how it's being distributed to the beneficiaries.
Right.
And if the trustee fails to do that, there's actually an action for that.
Oh, no, the trustee's got to follow the trust.
The trustee's got to follow the trust completely.
Right.
And this is why it's interesting when we go back to our first story tonight about this, the dog Trouble.
Right.
It caused trouble. And how do these grandchildren out of nowhere reach beyond the wording of the trust and allow the trustee to, obviously the trustee must have fought this.
Well, I think what happens in this case, because there's kind of a, well, first of all, you go to court, you know, and you go to probate court, and a judge makes these decisions, and there is I don't know if you call it a prejudice, a predisposition against leaving animals.
Of course.
Estates.
Of course.
And so I think that's what you ran into there. And even though they properly set it up, this was for the maintenance, and we've got a trustee.
Right.
And we do have an identifiable human to run things.
Right.
The grandchildren said, well, look, we're the bloodline. And I think the bloodline often has a good claim, you know, on these kind of things.
Did Mr. Ed have a good claim?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Of course.
Because Wilbur left him all his estate.
Of course.
But anyway, let's
a horse is a horse, of course.
A horse is a horse, of course.
Okay, so also divorce. Okay, so
you divorce that horse.
So you can put your IRA into the trust, and that's a divorce protection. Asset bankruptcy.
Well, wait a minute, let me ask that question, because I noticed while we were doing research for this one particular segment, I noticed that divorce, you say protection to divorce. So if I earned say I'm married for 30 years.
Right.
I have an IRA from all the work I did during that 30-year period.
This wouldn't be for this is not
not for me.
Not your income.
For me.
No, this would be for your inheritance.
Okay, but wait a minute. Okay, but technically it's community property.
No, inheritance aren't.
Not inheritance, but I'm telling you, if I'm married to Sally Mae, and Sally Mae says I want all his IRA because Jimmy Boy died,
right?
Then guess what? Sally Mae says,
well,
I want it, but no, not under what I'm asking this, because under the trust, where you're saying this see-through trust, if the IRA's already been lodged with the trust long ago, and Sally Mae didn't know that, how is the beneficiary going to have to deal with Sally Mae?
I think there would probably be something appropriate, and there could be a dispute on it.
I think Sally Mae would want at least 50%, if not more.
She would ask for half. But what I'm talking about is a different case. I'm talking about, let's say your father or mother passes away. They leave you your IRA, or your uncle passes away. They leave you their IRA with they've got a balance there.
Right.
And they leave you that remainder. And then you get divorced. If you have a trustee on this, you could have some timing and control of that, okay? Also, asset and bankruptcy, you could do a bankruptcy, and that trust could be separate. You could get that money later. Now, with the way it's usually...
Wait a minute, I have a question. Let me go back to the bankruptcy. So then, what I do notice is we are going to...
Because you don't have that money in hand at that time.
Yeah, but see, that's what's interesting. If you're doing a bankruptcy, the IRA has already been submitted to a trust. And if that's the case, then we have to think about how that IRA